Welcome to the Activists Without Borders podcast.
This is where we help you get informed, fast. We sift through stacks of material reports, articles, you name it, and pull out the key insights for you. Today, we're doing a really critical deep dive. We're looking at the UK government's recent announcement about the direct action group, Palestine Action, and specifically what this could all mean for things like protest rights, global solidarity. We've got a mix of sources here, recent news reports, statements from activists, some investigative journalism pieces too, trying to get a rounded view. So our mission really is to unpack this. What exactly happened? What sparked this big government response? And what are the wider implications here, according to the material we've looked at? And one detail really jumps out. This proposed ban, if it goes through, could mean supporting or even, promoting the group could land you in prison for up to 14 years, essentially making it illegal.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, beyond just that headline figure, to try and grasp the mechanics behind these kinds of government actions, because they often signal these broader trends in how states, how they deal with dissent.
Yeah.
This deep dive should help you see those connections, hopefully, give you a way to analyze similar things down the line.
Okay, let's unpack this then. To really get why this is such a big deal, we need to know what actually happened. What was the specific event that led to this announcement? So the immediate trigger, reading through the reports, seems to be this pretty high-profile action on June 20th. Palestine Action activists targeted RAF Brize Norton. That's the UK's biggest air base. They apparently got onto the site using electric scooters, sprayed red paint on 2 RAF planes.
Electric scooters, yeah, that detail really stands out, doesn't it? Quite audacious.
It does. And they also reportedly damaged parts of these planes, specifically parts known to be used for transporting arms to Israel. The immediate result, the activists involved were arrested. And not just any arrest, but under counter-terror laws. A terrorism investigation is now going on.
And what's really striking here, host, looking at the sources, is just how fast things moved after that. That action at Brize Norton happens, and then almost immediately you have the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, publicly stating she intends to proscribe Palestine Action.
Proscribe, meaning essentially ban it as a terrorist organization.
Exactly. And this isn't just talk. There's apparently a parliamentary vote scheduled, expected around June 30th. So it shows this incredibly rapid, very high-level government reaction directly linked to that specific protest action.
Right. But here's where it gets, really interesting, according to the sources we've read. They argue this isn't just a one-off reaction to Brize Norton. They suggest it fits into what they see as a wider pattern, a pattern of state response specifically towards Palestinian solidarity actions in the UK. What sort of other things do they point to?
Well, there are a few examples highlighted. For instance, one investigative piece mentioned reports that the state might have shared information from its own investigations with the Israeli embassy. Then there's the ongoing case of the Filton 18. These are activists who took action at an Elbit Systems site that's an Israeli weapons company, dismantling drone parts. They're apparently still in prison, awaiting trial.
And what else?
Another point raised is the Met Police putting a blanket ban on protests near synagogues on Saturdays. Some of the sources we looked at describe this as an alarming move, and they argue it sort of equates Palestinian solidarity with anti-Semitism. That's their framing.
And even just this past weekend, right, June 23rd, there were protests against this proposed ban itself, and reports suggest those protests were met with, police violence, kettling. That's where police contain protesters in a tight cordon.
Yeah, kettling.
Yeah.
And arrests, too.
So the sources seem to paint a picture of what they call a clampdown that's already happening, even before any official ban is in place.
Exactly. And when you connect these different points, the alleged info sharing, the Filton 18, the protest bans, the response to recent demos, the sources aren't just listing incidents. They're building a case, arguing this is evidence of, a broader story of repression. They really want you, the listener, to think about how these separate events might actually add up, how they could collectively impact protest rights, civil liberties in the UK, suggesting it's maybe more systematic than just reacting to things case by case.
That's a really significant point they're making. And if we zoom out now, beyond just the UK, the sources we reviewed suggest this isn't only a British issue. They point to what they see as a broader international pattern. What kind of examples do they give from other countries?
Well, the material mentions quite a few instances, particularly across the global north. So in the U.S., there's the case of Mahmoud Khalil, a Palestinian student at Columbia University, detained back in March and apparently still facing deportation proceedings. Then you have Germany, Canada, the Netherlands. In those countries, the Samadoun Prisoner Solidarity Network has actually been designated as a terrorist entity.
Right. Similar language to what's proposed in the UK.
Exactly. And the U.S. recently added Adamir, that's a well-known prisoner rights group, to its own global terrorist list.
And it's not just the West.
No. The sources also mention India. Solidarity events there have reportedly been shut down, sometimes violently, under the Modi government.
So quite a range of examples.
It is. And this really makes you ask, doesn't it? How do all these examples, taken together, feed into the narrative that our sources are presenting? This idea of kind of coordinated silencing, maybe, a global effort, as they put it, to criminalize solidarity with Palestine. It suggests a pretty challenging international landscape for this type of activism, with similar pushback happening in very different places. That feels like a key takeaway from the sources.
That definitely broadens the perspective. Which brings us to, well, a pretty crucial question often asked in these situations. Who might be benefiting, or perhaps influencing these kinds of actions against activist groups? What do the sources say about potential interests involved? Let's follow that trail a bit.
Well, one name comes up again and again in the reports we looked at, particularly in relation to Palestine Action's targets. That's Elbit Systems.
The Israeli weapons manufacturer we mentioned earlier.
That's the one. Palestine Action has consistently targeted their facilities in the UK.
Okay, so there's a direct link there.
Yes. And there's a specific claim highlighted in a piece by Declassified UK, which the sources cite. It alleges that Elbit Systems directly lobbied the UK Home Office. This was apparently after criminal charges against the founders of Palestine Action were actually dismissed last year.
Ah, interesting timing.
Very. And the sources don't pull any punches in how they interpret this. They frame it quite explicitly as corporate protectionism, not really about public safety.
So protecting the company rather than the public?
That's the argument presented in the material, yes. They make this really wrong assertion, and I'll quote it directly because it captures their viewpoint. The British government doesn't just tolerate Israel's war crimes. It enables them. It arms them. It protects the companies that profit from them.
That's a very direct statement from the sources.
It is. And again, we're relaying the perspective presented in the material we reviewed. But what's really revealing here, as the sources see it, is this potential link between corporate lobbying and government policy. They strongly suggest that decisions framed as being about security or counterterrorism might actually be heavily influenced by a desire to protect certain economic interests from, well, disruption by activists.
A sort of interplay between business and state action?
Precisely. It invites you to look critically at the stated motivations behind these crackdowns on protest groups and consider if other factors, like corporate pressure, might be playing a significant role.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together, the specific UK events, the global context, the potential corporate influence, what are the final takeaways from these sources? What do they suggest is the real significance of these developments, both for you listening and maybe for the future of activism itself?
Well, one of the most, I suppose, striking arguments in the material is almost paradoxical. They argue that this move to ban Palestine Action isn't actually a sign that the group is failing or weak. Quite the opposite.
How so?
They suggest it's evidence that their tactics, particularly direct action, are perceived as working, as having an impact.
Ah, so the ban is a reaction to effectiveness.
That's the perspective offered, that they're scared, as one source puts it, because the direct action is effective, and that's the motivation behind wanting to ban it. And linked to that is the concern about deliberately trying to blur the lines between activism and terrorism.
Right, and they even state, quite boldly, being prescribed means you're having an impact.
Exactly, it flips the narrative. But beyond that specific group, the sources express these much broader worries, concerns about, quote, the slide into authoritarianism, the criminalization of dissent, the silencing of those who speak truth. It's positioned as part of a much bigger picture.
Yeah, and those foundational statements they make are really powerful.
They are. Things like solidarity is not terrorism, dissent is not terrorism, Palestine Action is not terrorism.
And that final message, we are all Palestine Action.
These statements really hammer home what the sources see as the core issue. The need to clearly distinguish between legitimate protest, even disruptive protest, and actual illegal terrorist activity. They argue this distinction is vital for civil liberties. And they're essentially calling attention to how legal tools, like prescription laws, might be used to narrow the space for dissent, especially around certain political issues. It's about that line, and who gets to draw it.
Okay, so let's quickly sum up what we've covered in this deep dive. We started with that specific incident, the action at RAF Bryce Norton, and saw how quickly it led to this proposed government ban on Palestine Action here in the UK. Then we looked at how the sources connect this to a wider perceived pattern of repression within the UK itself.
Right, and also how this isn't just a UK story. The sources suggest it aligns with a global trend, efforts seen internationally to criminalize solidarity with Palestine, examples from the US, Europe, India.
And finally, we touched on the source's claims about potential corporate influence, specifically mentioning Elbit systems and lobbying efforts aimed at protecting business interests.
Yeah. So thinking about everything we've discussed, drawing from the sources, perhaps a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. Given these claims of a coordinated silencing and this deliberate blurring, as they put it, of the lines between activism and terrorism, how might understanding these alleged patterns help you? How might it help you critically assess future actions against activist groups, whether they happen locally, where you are, or internationally? What does this deep dive really suggest about the changing landscape for dissent and for free expression today?
Something definitely worth reflecting on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. As always, we hope this gives you plenty to think about and encourages you to keep exploring these complex issues.